Hi guys, welcome to Learn That Photo. My name is David and today we are going to look at the basics of Photoshop, how to make some basic adjustments in exposure, in the colour, and getting used to layers and layer masks. These are the essential things that we need to do in Photoshop for almost any kind of edit. I'm using Photoshop CC version 19 and there's not too much difference between this and other versions, but just so that you're aware. And this is the kind of home or start screen of Photoshop. Now there's three ways to open an image in Photoshop. You can drag and drop a file into this centerpiece here. You can go File, Open, or you can click this Open button here and it will also take you through to opening files. Now I'm going to try and find an image here that's maybe not too contrasty or has too much colour going on. Some of these are already edited images. Let's see. This one here doesn't look like it is though, so let's go with this and see what we can do. There we go, so we've opened our image in Photoshop and let's see what we can improve now. It's quite a bland image, and the colours are quite washed out and the contrast is quite washed out. So I think what's happened here is it was taken through glass. This little reflection on the right hand side here is due to that as well. So that's exactly what's happened, it's been taken through glass. It's just lost a little bit of that punch. So let's see if we can add that back in while learning some of the basics at the same time. Now when you load up an image in Photoshop, the first thing is to get used to the layout, the arrangement, or the workspace. It might not be exactly like this, so if you're seeing something different on your computer, don't panic. There's a very easy way to sort this out. Up at the top here, where it says Window, click that, and in Workspace, we have all of the default settings for different types of workspaces, which is just different ways that Adobe think you might want Photoshop laid out. I'm on the photography one, and I think I might have over the years made a little tweak or two to that as well. And because Photoshop does so many different things, they have different default workspaces with different tools and different panels already laid out. So if you don't have anything that I mentioned, for example the navigator over here, the layer panel below it, or anything else that we're using, you can find it all from this Window tab here. For example, if we needed the History tab and it's not open over the right hand side, we could just click History and it pings open. So anything that you don't have, you can find it right here. Just the same if you accidentally close any of these, if you get rid of the Layers tab and you really need it, you can find it from here as well. So it's a really handy thing to just know. Window, and you can find any of those panels right there. Over to the left, we have all of our individual tools. So we have our brush tool, we have our eraser, we have different pointers and all sorts. There's smudge tools, and all of these ones that have a little arrow at the bottom right hand corner. If you hold with the left mouse button down, it gives you some extra options. And the dots down here, if we hold down on that, we get a whole bunch of extra tools again, so even more tools there. There's quite a few now over the various versions of Photoshop that they've accumulated. We've got a lot of different options. Just now, we're just going to leave it on brush because that's all we're going to be working with at the moment. For all of our adjustments, we're just going to use the brush tool. So one tool for everything we're going to be using. The other part is the tabs up at the top. Now if we do make any changes, if we're going to use, say, a different tool, the settings for any of those tools will be up here. You click on a new tool and it pops up here. However, just like the workspaces, this might be over a bit or moved ever so slightly on your version. So click through a couple of the tools, see whereabouts that bit is. It should just be up here somewhere. So even on the brush tool. Now up here we have our different tabs as well. File is all your basic things that are in most different programs. So you have new for a new document, you have open to open an image, you have save, export, or print, just all the basics like that. Nothing too technical in there, that's where you find all those. Edit, image, and layer are all used for adjusting your photograph or your your artwork in some sort of way. We'll generally use the layer and the adjustment layers at the moment. This gives us a way of editing the photograph without actually doing anything directly to the image. Instead, what we're doing is creating a new layer on the top that we are editing independently. So if we make any mistakes, do anything wrong, or just don't like the changes we've made, it's super easy to just undo that. It's not a big deal. It gives us a little bit more confidence. We can really dive in and play around with the editing without having to worry too much. So that's a good habit to get into, is use layers whenever you can. And then along here is the filter tab for things like sharpening, taking out grain or noise, blur, or the filter gallery that has a whole bunch of really wacky effects and things in there as well. So to begin with, let's grab our first adjustment layer and just get stuck in. The best thing with Photoshop is just to try and see what happens. If you break it, just close it and reopen it and try again. That's the worst that can happen, so just get stuck in. So let's start off by getting some contrast back into this. It's really bland, so we're going to go Layer, Adjustment Layer, and the Brightness Contrast is the very first one there. Click on that. This first bit is just basically to set a name for the layer. If you're working on a big piece that's maybe got 40, 50, 60 layers, yes, name them, keep them organised. For something like this, it's not quite as important, so we'll just hit OK. And we have our two sliders, Brightness and Contrast. So let's add some contrast. If we took it out, very, very bland. So let's add some contrast in, and you can see over here, it's really just adding to the punchings there. We're getting some of that back that was missing. I'm going to put a decent amount in, maybe a bit too much. I'll show you why in a second. Really throw that up. And then what's also happened is over here we now have a new layer in our layers panel. So we have our initial image layer down here, and just above we have this adjustment layer. This is how Photoshop works. We've got this new layer going on independent from the photograph itself. It's just sitting above. We can turn that off or on, just like that. So it's not an adjustment to the actual image, it's just a little filter sitting up above, and that's the way we want to edit as much as possible if we can. We can also, if we want, go back in, and maybe we think, actually that was too big of an edit, let's take it down a bit. We can adjust that afterwards, change what that filter is doing. And then we've got this little white box beside it. Now this is the most important thing that we'll go over in this video. This is our layer mask, and this lets us paint this adjustment on to individual parts of the image rather than the entire image all at once. Now basically, in simple terms, white is on, black is off. That's all we need to keep in mind. So everything's white, the whole thing's on. If we change it all to black, and since it's pure white, we can do that just by inverting rather than having to paint black over the whole thing. So let's just invert it, Control and I. We've painted that adjustment off. We're going to use our brush. We're going to set our brush white to paint the adjustment on in specific places. So it's all set off, and then we're just going to paint it on as and when we need it. So we've got our brush, we need to make sure that it's set to white. Got a black and a white box here. I need to make sure the top box is set to white. There we go. And if it wasn't, if this was different colours or something other than black and white, we can just click on the top one and use our colour picker to go pure white. So there's that as well. So we've got our brush, it's now the right colour. The next thing we need to do is go up to the brush settings. So we need to make sure we are on a soft brush. So that's basically how much the edge of the brush blends when you use it. So a soft brush is this one here. Hard brush has a really hard edge to it. So we want a soft brush. You can either use one of the templates here, or you can just drag this hardness slider all the way to 0. The opacity is how much it paints on at a time. So 100%, it will go from completely off to completely on. You can see it by going this, and let's just turn that back up again so we can really see the effects. Go onto our layer mask, and we could paint that on there so you can see exactly what that's done. Now, if I turn it off, you can see it's just on that one line that we painted. I don't really like that, so let's paint that back off again. So black brush now, and just paint all of that back off. There we go. So we can go in and paint on or paint off as much as we want. And that's the basic concept with these. Let's go to on, go a little bit more subtle. There we go. and I'm just blending on as and when it is needed. So those shadows really need that black back in there, that little bit of contrast. The ground as well. Let's go with a slightly bigger brush. That's still not big enough, but that was because I was using the slider then. It's really difficult to tell how big the brush will be with this slider. So the other thing we could do is hold down Control, right click, and drag right makes the brush bigger, or drag left makes it smaller, and you can pick the exact size brush you want that way. So just Alt and right click held down together. Go. I'm going to paint some contrast back in over here. And I'm just going to bring this down and paint it off. This was a bit much over here. There we go, just picking and choosing exactly where I want that adjustment. And if we want to see the effects, we can just use this little layer visibility indicator. We can click it off and on to see exactly the change we've made. There we go. Now, we can also change the effects of this layer by turning down the overall layer opacity, so we can have the full effect of that adjustment layer on, or we can bring it down gradually and blend it back in. Go anywhere in between. Think about there. There we go. So that's just got a little bit more contrast back in the image. Now let's see what else we can do. So let's go layer again, new adjustment layer, and vibrancy this time. So let's give a little bit of a boost to the colours, like that. And let's drag this vibrancy slider up. Now, I always think the vibrancy is a bit more realistic looking than the saturation. That's the saturation up, really over the top, not very realistic looking at all. The vibrancy, just a little bit more tame, a little bit more controlled. Even though I don't like the yellow it's bringing in here, I do like the red though. So let's go about there, and I'll just paint it on the red. I won't have the yellow. I can be selective about that using a layer mask. So the same thing's happened. We now have 3 layers. The bottom one being the image on its own, the next one being the brightness and contrast filter, and then the next one being the vibrancy filter, or the vibrancy layer. And again, we've got this layer mask. So the first thing I always do is just Control I, invert it, turn the mask off, fully black, get yourself a brush with white as the top colour, and then just paint on as and when needed. Maybe a little bit more to the grass here. It's maybe a bit too much, I'll paint it back off a little bit. Just blend that back ever so slightly. There we go. Just added that little bit of a punch to the red on the face. There we are. So that gives us 2 layers that both work in the same way. It's just adjustment layer, set the settings how you want them, and then paint it on as and when you see fit on the image. And you can go back and change these, paint them on, paint them off, change the settings by just double clicking on the layers adjustment icon there. Go back in, change that, or go back into the contrast and change that at any given time. Want to do one more, and let's make the face a little bit brighter. So layer, new adjustment layer. Let's do this from the brightness contrast again. There we go, and just put another one on. Right there. Turn the layer mask off. Make sure we've got a white brush. Set the size, and we'll just paint it on where we want. There we go. And that's the difference that's made. So very quickly we can start making adjustments to just specific parts of the image. And with just 3 adjustment layers, we went from a bland faux, added some contrast, added some brightness, and added a little bit of vibrancy. Let's make it a little bit more. There we go. Now I want to give this a little bit of depth to the colour, to the contrast, to the exposure overall. And I feel it's not done enough, but just darkening a couple of select bits of the image in the background, just giving it a slightly deeper colour, sometimes makes the rest pop. So I'm going to do that just ever so slightly. Again, I think I'll just do this with a brightness contrast layer, just keep things simple. Go down, make it a bit darker, and turn the contrast up. There. Turn that mask off. And with just a light brush, I don't want this on fully, we'll just darken up a couple of little bits here and there. This bit in here that should be a bit darker, but the window reflection just lightened things up a bit much. There we go. Just darkening up a couple of the shadows and the bits that need it. We are. Not too bad. And that's just a couple of basic layers all done in the same way. So we have went layer, new adjustment layer, selected the one we want, and then we've just used the layer mask to paint that on as and when we see fit. So let's do one more. Let's make a black and white version of this image. Again, let's go layer, new adjustment layer, and this time black and white. And it has a whole bunch of different filters that we could use for this, or you can pick the amount of black and white for each colour. So if you wanted the red in the face to come up brighter or darker, you can go and set these all individually and really have control over how you process the black and whites in this. So I think dark brass, greens and yellows, and blues down a bit. Let the detail come through. Red's about there. There we go. I think with the black and white I would maybe add a little bit more contrast to that. Again, Control and I to turn that mask off, and then just painting on where I want that a little bit more contrast to be. That's a slightly more subtle edit, but just makes a difference. There we go. And there we are. So we have went from our starting image. I'll just take these all off. There we go. That was where we started. We've added a touch of contrast, brightness, colour, and then we've darkened in a few bits just for a little bit of added depth. Changed it to black and white and adjusted for that black and white edit as well. All done in the same way, only using one tool, but we have all these different changes that we can really control on the image just from that one tool. Hopefully this has helped you in some way. If it has, please subscribe, hit like, give this a share, or let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you for watching.